Jonathan Healy on Newstalk Lunchtime. Now, the Ombudsman for Children, Emily Logan, has urged a school to apologise after a teenager was refused a place on the grounds that she was pregnant. The lay-owned Catholic Ethos School, we don't know where it is, that's all we're being told about it, said, quote, "It's not a haven for young pregnant people or for young mothers." The girl, she was just 16 at the time, was turned down by the principal, who's also the school's owner, its founder and its patron. Emily Logan said she was very badly treated, and the Department of Education says it's taking the matter seriously. Emily Logan was on Newstalk Breakfast this morning. Here's what she said.
So this is unusual, but I suppose my job as Ombudsman for Children is to make sure that the public, this issue I think is of public interest for the public to understand the reality of some children's lives. And for me, this is wholly unacceptable that any school would think that it's acceptable to treat a young person in this way.
Now, the Children's Minister, Francis Fitzgerald, has also been commenting on this, calling on the principal of that school to apologise to the girl who was refused admission. Fergus Finlay, the Chief Executive of Bernardo's, is with us this afternoon. Fergus, hello.
Hello, Jonathan. How are you?
I'm very well. Your reaction to this story, it's almost incredible.
I suppose maybe the first thing I'd like to say, Jonathan, is that a story like this highlights the importance of having a children's ombudsman like Emily Logan, who's not, afraid to go and investigate this kind of injustice wherever it happens within the publicly funded system. The second thing the case highlights is the complete absence of anything in our law about the best interests of children, particularly in our education acts. There's no reference whatsoever that obliges any school to have regard to the best interests of children in its, enrolment policies or its appeal procedures or anything of that kind. This is a remarkable story in some ways because the identity of the school will be known. I don't want to name the school because I don't want to run the risk of identifying the girl or her family, but it's already reasonably well known. It's a privately owned school whose principal is also the boss and answerable to nobody at all. But it is fully funded, 100% funded, by the Department of Education, who have no control whatsoever over it. And that's a sort of technical aspect of education law in Ireland, which ought to have been changed years ago and never has been. I mean, what happened in this case, in the current era in which we live, possibly blighted a young person's life. The last thing that a school should be doing. It certainly denigrated her. It certainly painted her in a way that was completely unacceptable, passed a judgment that no school is entitled to pass.
Well, if they're saying it's a Catholic Ethos School, you're saying it's a privately owned school, so therefore, they are within their rights to do this. That's a problem with the wider law. But if
they're within their rights.
If the principal did nothing wrong here, he did nothing wrong.
Well, of course he did something wrong. He denigrated a young girl who had the misfortune to get pregnant. He reached all sorts of conclusions, and it's clear from the correspondence and the stance he took that he just reached all sorts of conclusions about that young girl. We work with young girls all over Ireland who find themselves pregnant. And one of the things we try as hard as we possibly can to do is to encourage them to stay in education and complete their education. And we get enormous support from the vast majority of schools in doing that.
How do they handle that information? Because if it's a 16-year-old girl who finds themselves pregnant, it's a very distressing time for them. And the last thing they need to do is to be isolated from their friends who are in school around them or to be ostracised in any way. So what is best practice? Well,
best practice is to try and keep the child in education. And the great majority of schools in Ireland work very hard at supporting children, and they are children, in that situation, and encouraging them to stay there. Their friends will often rally around and be helpful and supportive. It's not the end of the world, and it needn't be the end of the world. But to be told by the principal of your local school that you're simply not acceptable anymore because and she was told this twice. She was told when she got pregnant, and then she was told after she tried to go back to school after she'd had the baby. she was told that she wasn't acceptable in the school, and that the school wasn't, quote unquote, for the likes of her. It wasn't to be used as a dumping ground, and that was the phrase used, for the likes of her.
Is there anything the state could do? The language that was used there, that's the language in the letters that were sent out, you're telling me. Is there anything the state can do if this school is funded by the state? Is there anything that Francis Fitzgerald or Rory Quinn in the Department of Education can do to try and, I suppose, tell this principal and tell this school that this is not what Ireland in the 21st century is about?
Well, we're going to have a referendum soon on the rights of children. The government has promised to have a referendum on the rights of children, and there is intense debate going on within government and within a wider community about what should be in that referendum. Many of us feel that it's absolutely important and vital that the voice and the best interests of children should be adequately reflected in our Constitution, and if not in our Constitution, in our fundamental law. The Education Acts that govern in the provision of education, and under which every school is 100% funded, have to be changed to ensure that at the very least a decision like this must be made in a way that takes account of the best interests of the child involved, B, that takes account of the best interests of other children in the school, and C, provides a guaranteed independent source of appeal so that a wrong can be redressed. In a case like this,
the problem is that if you talk about an appeal, Fergus, that takes time. This is a young girl. She's pregnant for 9 months. This is weighing on her mind. The pregnancy is weighing on her mind. To get this done in a speedy fashion is going to be very difficult.
Of course, and in this case, the decision shouldn't have been made in the first place. But the girl is left for the rest of her life with the knowledge that she was turned away. And I mean, coming from a school, we all remember, one of our fundamental Catholic stories about a young pregnant mother being turned away from the inn and having to give birth in a stable. Coming from a school that boasts a strongly Catholic ethos, this kind of reaction is simply inconceivable. It is nothing more than bigotry. And ought to be prosecutable, in my view, under equality legislation.
Is there still a stigma around being a single mother, a teenage single mother in Ireland? I mean, I thought we'd moved on significantly from that point when it would have been, so we say in the 70s, that there still would have been, eyebrows raised or tutting as people walk down the street if they found themselves in that situation. Have we not moved on from that, Fergus?
We find occasionally that young girls who get pregnant find themselves very alone. That happens occasionally. It is much more common now that they would get support and encouragement, not around, getting pregnant, but around coping with something that has happened, with a life-changing event. And we find the education system, in general terms, to be in the vanguard in terms of, providing a supportive environment. The key to if you want kids to get pregnant and in that process to become a burden on the state for the rest of their lives, what you do is you isolate them, you ghettoise them, you stigmatise them, and you deprive them of support. If you don't want them to become a burden, if you want them to grow and their children to grow as independent adults, then what you do is you keep them in education and you encourage them to look to the future.
I would actually be intrigued as to what sex education would have constituted in that school in the first place. I wonder what they would have told their pupils about how to perhaps avoid pregnancy in the first instance.
According to the whole school evaluation that was carried out on that school some years ago, there is a programme in place which emphasises, good living and all that kind of thing. It's not a programme that the Department of Education found fault with. What is clearly lacking at some level in this school is any concept of charity or compassion. But it doesn't seem. I don't want to stigmatise or brand the whole school that way. This is very clearly down to one person.
OK, let's talk about something else that's in the news today, if we can. There's a survey out showing that it's only a quarter of parents who were questioned would send their children to a primary school that was run by the church. Now, we know there's a lot of discussion at the moment about patronage, and there is a move away from the Catholic Church being the predominant player in the primary school sector. But does that mean that perhaps Rory Quinn needs to speed up his efforts to change patronage in Ireland?
Well, I mean, he's a year in office, and it was one of the first things he started to do. I think we are going through a transition. I think an awful lot of parents in Ireland no longer want to see any one denomination controlling the ethos of the education system. At the same time, I think every parent in Ireland wants to send their child to a school that promotes decent values, decent ethics, decent concepts of citizenship and so on. I think getting from A to B, if you like, getting from where we were to where we need to be, is a delicate process and is likely to be one that takes time. I was disappointed with the first report of the body that was set up to look at this, because it seemed to indicate that there were only a very, very small number of schools where that would be, delisted in terms of their patronage, and that seemed to me to suggest that the influence of the Catholic Church was still very strong in the thinking. I think we've passed the time when the influence of any one church should be dominating that debate.
It is a delicate matter, and the Minister says he's tackling it in a delicate way.
And he is the first. He's the first to try, in fairness.
Yeah, well, he is the first to try. But at the same time, if 75% are saying they'd prefer their children in a school that wasn't run by the Catholic Church, perhaps, delicate and all as the process is, he should be moving faster.
Yeah, well, I think that by the time Rory Quinn leaves office, he will have effected quite a profound transformation in the way in which our school system is run. I think if I were him, or if I was in a position to influence him, I would encourage him to go a bit further in a variety of different ways, not just around the issue of patronage. But I think the issue that we were discussing earlier also demonstrates that the Department of Education needs to have a role in relation to standards within schools, standards of behaviour, standards of management, standards of appeal, and I think it has largely washed its hands of that role over the years. You may remember the case of Louise O'Keeffe, a very brave young woman who was sexually abused by a school principal in Kinsale, or near Kinsale.
That's right, in Dundurrow, yeah.
And when she appealed, the state fought her tooth and nail. When she tried to sue the state, they fought her tooth and nail on the grounds that it was the bishop and not the state that was responsible for the abuse in the school, despite the fact that the principal concerned had every aspect of his pay, conditions and his working life regulated by the Department of Education. And that position was upheld by the courts because of what, in my view, represents a significant gap in the law.
Let's just go back to that issue of the pregnant teenager, and a lot of people agreeing with you this afternoon, Fergus, but there are those who are disagreeing with you. I'll just give you two as a sample of the messages we're getting through to the programme. Shane on text said, I would not want my impression 15-year-old daughter in a school that condones teenage pregnancy, so I believe that the school in question is right. And Claire got in contact by phone to say that principal had to consider the other students and he made the right decision. How about the students who might be offended by a teenager who had a baby out of wedlock? He has the right to maintain his school's ethos. Emily Logan was out of order this morning.
First of all, nobody is talking about schools condoning pregnancy. Nobody wants to see young teenagers becoming pregnant. It's not, it's not the kind of thing that anybody would advocate in society. It is, however, a reality of life that affects some girls particularly, and it affects in many cases, young boys too. But there's never been an instance in Ireland, and I doubt if there ever will be, of a boy being turned away from school because he got a girl pregnant. And, the least we're all entitled to expect is that the same standard will be applied to both boys and girls.
What do you say to Shane, though, who doesn't want his daughter in a school where there is a pregnant girl because he thinks that sends the wrong message? Who should be responsible for imparting that message in that household?
I think you've answered the question yourself in some ways. I mean, I think the reality is all of us want our kids to grow up with respect for other children, with sympathy, with compassion, and we want to impart those kind of values to our kids. None of us want our kids sitting in judgment on other children because of circumstances in their lives.
All right, Fergus Finlay, Chief Executive Officer of Bernardo. Thanks very much for talking to us on Newstalk Lunchtime, Fergus.